What if pain isn't the problem, but actually the pathway back to you? You're listening to The Leadership Wound, From Pain to Permission. I'm Amanda Rohr, your host and founder of Authentically You, coaching for embodied spiritual living and leading. This is where we get honest about the real cost of leadership, the burnout, the pretending, the rejection, and the return to your authentic self. Because this isn't about performance, it's about permission. Welcome to the leader you've always been.
I think the word leader may not be terribly helpful to us sometimes. Be who God has called you to be. If you do that, then you will naturally do what it is that God has called you to do. Some of those activities will be defined by others as leadership. Some will be defined as followership. Some will be ambiguous. This is a matter of being fully formed. And, we haven't paid as much attention to the formation of ourselves and embracing of ourselves. And by the way, I'll throw in this one with it because you mentioned it earlier. God does not shame us into formation, into wholeness. That is not his tactic. That's the tactic of the church, but it's not God's.
Yes.
It's always grace all the way through. So allow that grace to more fully form you. Be who you're supposed to be. Everything else will fall in place.
Welcome back to The Leadership Wound. I'm your host, Amanda Rohr, founder of Authentically You, coaching for embodied spiritual living and leading. And today we are going to begin a special ongoing series within my podcast called the Unscripted Conversation. These episodes are intended to be weaved in and out through my regular episodes, and they're designed to be a little less formal than the regular interview, kind of like sitting and chatting over coffee with a good friend. In each episode, I sit with leaders who are willing to lay down their script and share the truth about their leadership stories, the moments of pain, awakening, and transformation that have shaped them into the leader that they are today. These conversations are not a polished strategy, but rather they are honest truth about what happens when we stop pretending and we start healing and we begin to lead a little bit more like our true selves. In each conversation, we move through 4 themes. The first is, how do we define leadership beyond the title and the positions? Next, we dive into what does authenticity really look like in the world today? Then we talk about our own hidden cost of leadership, our wounds. And then we transition at the end into what we've learned throughout the healing process. And my hope is that through talking with many different leaders in diverse backgrounds, we begin to see a little bit more of a fuller picture of what authentic leadership truly looks like. And this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, I am honored to welcome my good friend and guest, Dr. Tony Blair. Dr. Blair has been a friend, a mentor, and one of my most formative influences in my own leadership journey. He was my seminary president and professor at Evangelical Theological Seminary, now called Kairos, in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. And to clarify for listeners, he is not the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, although he did meet him once. You might still call him a minister in some sense because he is sharing the lead pastor, senior pastor role at Hosanna, a fellowship of Christians. And this is exactly where I first got introduced to co-leading, co-pastoring, was from that concept as he led with another woman. And that vision for co-leading has never left my heart and is still in my sights. Dr. Blair has served as a dean, a faculty member at several Christian higher education institutes, as a seminary professor and president, and now a legacy president. Is that correct? as a merger into Kairos, and continues to train, coach, and consult with leaders across different sectors. And he's also a trained spiritual director. His leadership experience spans the church and academia as well, in nearly all faith-based nonprofit leadership roles. He's co-authored several different books, some on ministry leadership, church history, and adult education, as well as journaling several different leadership articles on different kinds of models of leadership. He frequently presents on a wide range of topics, including recent AI and leadership, which could be very interesting in its own little podcast. But Dr. Blair, Tony, as I know you more, so welcome to the Leadership Wound. I'm so excited that you are here with us.
And I am trying to figure out who that expert is that you just described there. I am reluctantly not all of that, unfortunately, but I'll bring what I can to this conversation.
Great.
Also said they were all beggars in search of bread, and I want one too. Yeah.
Me as well. Well, we're going to start our conversation off by widening our view of leadership so it's not so narrow and beyond the titles and the roles. I have a very good spiritual director myself who has helped me to widen my perspective on what leadership means. And I continue to hear over and over with people that they did not see themselves as a leader. So I want to ask you that question as we begin. When you think about leadership today in today's culture, how would you define it beyond a position or authority?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions. I teach leadership and I read the leadership literature, and there's nothing that's being argued about more than how do you define what this thing is. We didn't even have a word for it in English up until the late 1800s. And that
Mm,
word wasn't hardly ever used until after World War II. So people talked about what we would call leadership in politics and sports and in higher education in the church, but they used different words to describe those different leaders. And it wasn't until after World War II that people began to say, what's going on over here in this sector and what's going on over here and what's going on over here might all be representations of the same thing. And it gave us the ability then to talk about leadership as a concept. If we don't have a word for it, you don't have a concept.
yeah, right.
But it also muddied the waters because is what I do in a classroom or in a pulpit the same thing that a military general does? Is it the same thing
Mm,
that a coach does with a little league team? And so we end up with all these adjectives, all these verbs out there trying to get to the heart of what leadership is.
yeah.
For a long time, I got enamored by the concept of leadership as a change agent. And I haven't abandoned that. I do think there's something about being a leader that provokes or instills or initiates change. I'm less convinced, I guess, at this point in time that it is the responsibility of the leader, him or herself, to do all of that.
Mm,
If you would ask me my own mission in life, it is to equip people to change their world. My job is more behind the scenes, actually, than it is in front of the scenes. I get in front of an audience more frequently than most people do, I guess. But I think the real work of transformation is being done by everybody. And I
mm,
get to provoke and initiate, resource and equip and do everything necessary to help other people do that. And if that's true, then maybe this is what Joanne and I say to our own folks. Everybody's a leader and
yeah.
everybody's a follower. And we simply need to find out where it is in life we do one and where it is that we do the other. And
Mm.
sometimes we may have trouble figuring out which is which.
Yeah, right, right. What do you think keeps people from seeing themselves as a leader, even if they clearly influence others?
Yeah, I think it's the definitions that have been created and some of the models that have been created. One of the models of leadership that's been very popular, particularly among Christians for the past 45 years, is the transformational leadership model. That's one of our words. We love transformational leadership. But the problem with that model is that it requires a leader to be heroic.
Mm.
So we apply this to Gandhi, to Martin Luther King, to Mother Teresa, to the big
And who
names.
can
And
compare against them?
exactly, I'm
Yeah.
not them. Therefore, I'm not a leader. But what if that's not the model?
Yeah, for sure. Where have you seen leadership in its most unexpected ways or shapes or sizes recently?
Oh, that's a really good question. My grandkids,
How so?
ages 3 and 4. Oh, they pull me.
Pull
tug
you
me,
into
pull
all
me.
kinds of things.
Exactly. I do all sorts of things I never thought I would do or could do out of love for them because of their excitement. If leadership is provoking change, my
Mm.
grandchildren provoke change in me. Do they do it
Mm.
intentionally? Do they call themselves leaders? They don't. They're
Yeah,
being
right.
themselves. And
Yeah.
because I love them, I want to do everything possible to help them be fully themselves and me be fully myself.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's
Now,
almost like
sometimes it's worse. I'm leading them around too, but
yeah, but
it's
in its
mutual.
purest form, they don't even know that that's what they are doing. And is it, then they're not craving the limelight. They're not craving all of those other kind of things that we often think of as leadership. And I love that thought of children leading us. I mean, that's pretty scriptural, I believe.
Don't let anyone look down on you because of your youth. Yes.
Yes,
And we
yes.
offer that to young pastors and young organizational leaders. What if we would expand that a little bit more broadly?
Yes, yes, and not have a timidity about us just because of our age. And I always like to say that the Holy Spirit doesn't come in different sizes. He is the same size in every person, no matter what age or stage, and has that capacity. One of the core themes in my own coaching practice is this word of authenticity, which means to be leading from your true self, not from who you think you're supposed to be or from someone else's perspective of what they want you to be. So let me ask you, why do you think that the world needs more authentic leaders today in this culture, where we're at today?
I wonder sometimes if they do.
Mm.
Mm, I don't know. I'm of two minds on this authenticity model. By the way, this too is one of the current models of leadership, and Christians have embraced it
Yeah.
because, again, it's one of our words.
Mm.
And some have done it in a very positive way that we just want to be real. We want to be real boys and girls
Mm.
and engage people like that. Others have done it in a more cynical way, which I would translate as how do I fake authenticity so people will follow me because they think I'm authentic?
Mm.
So we have the same thing with servant leadership too. How do I
Yes.
exhibit servant behaviors in a way that'll get people to do what I want them to do, which isn't servanthood at all?
No.
The problem with authenticity, of course, is that once we become real, we also have to be raw. We're all
Mm.
broken.
Yeah.
We're all in the midst of it. So we have to show our jagged edges. And I think there is still this desire, or at least among many in the population, particularly in the church, that they have leaders who are fully polished.
Mm.
And to be real and raw and broken and jagged and have all that stuff is scary. It's
Yeah.
off putting to many. And so, therefore, what happens is that leaders tend to hide all that stuff and they fake
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
some moment. And often the stress of that causes them to become more raw, more real, more broken.
Yeah.
And something happens and that is revealed. And then, of course, they get the judgment and the shame that comes from you weren't the perfect person that we had presumed you to be.
Put you on the pedestal to be. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you're not, so we knock you off the pedestal and you're broken for life. We've got to break out of that pattern somehow.
Mm.
I think there has to be somewhere along the way the permission giving right from the outset to
Yes.
be real, to be human, to be
Mm.
growing, to be make mistakes, to deal with all of the same things that other people deal with and
Yeah.
not have to bear that burden of leadership. When I was a young man, I wanted to be a leader because I knew I had gifts and skills to offer. By
Mm.
the time I was at midlife, I've been at this 40 years. By the time
Yeah.
I was at midlife, I no longer wanted it. It was too heavy a burden to bear.
Mm.
Now,
It's like we're not giving permission to be human. Yes.
I happen to now be leading in a church that does do this very well. And
Mm.
it is a wonderful place in which to be authentic, at least to a greater degree than I found elsewhere.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure the world is fully ready for authenticity yet. We're a little bit
Mm.
too angry with each other to allow ourselves to be fully ready.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make about how is it fake authenticity? Is it the real authenticity? Can you really handle authenticity? I mean,
Mhm.
when you work with people, it's messy. There's humanness that is part of that. Those are all really, really good points. And also, what are you being authentic to? In our faith tradition, our authenticity is based on Jesus Christ and him is fully human. It's not a permission to be a jerk, or
Mm.
just, I'm just being real. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we
Yeah.
see people use that as an excuse to hurt one another. But I tell you, if you have a congregation full of people who have jagged edges, they're going to make each other bleed, even if they don't intend to.
Yes.
What do you do
Yes.
with that? So
Mm,
we can't talk about authenticity without also talking about grace.
yes.
Without grace, then all we have in authenticity is a bunch of people doing truth telling and hurting one another.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, yes. So putting those together, with authenticity is grace, and the grace is there because of the woundings that we get from one another. And that leads so nicely into the next section. Um, and it's also how I frame my own inner work. We all have inner work to do, and sometimes it's hard. My definition of leadership is quite simple. When I think about leadership, I think about influence. And if I think about the capacity that we all have as humans, we all carry some level of influence to one another, just as you mentioned with your grandchildren. And if we do that, if we're all leaders and we all have influence, then inevitably we will all at some point in our lives have some type of leadership wound. Um, and in my own work, I've become deeply committed to normalizing that word wound. So people have asked me, like, why do you call it the leadership wound? And it's because I want leaders to feel comfortable acknowledging their own wounds without judgment or fear. I feel like we just need to normalize this concept of humanness. And if we're going to acknowledge our humanness, that means that we're going to acknowledge the woundedness. And hopefully we can do that without shame, which is a process I've been going through my own self for a lifetime. Is there something wrong with me if I'm wounded? And personally, I find so much compassion and so much ability to be transparent myself when I hear the stories of other people and their woundedness, because it makes me feel like, oh, I guess I'm normal. I guess I'm human. This isn't abnormal. This is a part of the learning and growth story of all of us. And with that in mind, and with your own courageousness, could you name for us a one or however many you want to wounds that you have occurred? What kind of leadership wound have you faced, and what did it reveal about you?
Yeah, thank you for the way you introduced that, Amanda. I know you're living this out personally, and I think this is a gift of grace that you're offering to your audience and to the people that you influence as a leader. Um, After I got wounded, I came to books like The Wounded Healer and Leading with a Limp and things like that that perhaps explained a little bit of that process. I've come now to the point where I will say it even more bluntly than I used to. I don't trust a leader who hasn't been broken.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, I don't think we have to pursue it. Life will do that. Leadership will do that all the
Amen to
time.
that. Yes.
But if we haven't been broken, leadership has far too many temptations
Mm.
in terms of power, in terms of using people in other ways. So
Yeah.
somewhere along the way, this is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen or whatever, we may not be safe with leadership.
Yeah.
When it does happen, it could destroy us or it can make us safe and more whole
Mm.
and more healthy. It took me a long, long time to understand that, however, because I still carry my wounds.
Yeah.
My first one was as a young pastor. This is over 30 years ago now. I was a pretty successful. I started pastoring. I was 20 years old, far too young. I knew a lot up here. I didn't have the rest
Mm.
of me developed, but I knew what I could, and I was pretty good at it. I didn't have to grow a church, and I kept getting promoted to larger, country pastor, getting promoted to larger ministries and larger ones. So that by the time I was in my late 20s, I was pastoring a multi-staff church, and I'm the young guy on the team, but with this growing church, and by the met, I was really committed to, addicted to the church growth movement
Mm.
in those days, and so by the metrics of
Of
ministry
success.
success, I
Yeah.
was I was doing pretty good. Until one day I walked into a meeting and got kicked out of my position on my rear end.
Mm.
Never saw it coming. to this day, don't fully understand that because there was a process that they were to follow and they ignored it. And God was doing everything right and they were ignoring that. And it took a lot of processing through the years to figure out what had happened there.
Mm.
So a couple of observations about that. Number one, my goodness, that was the grace that I needed.
Mm.
That broke me of my addiction to bigger, better, faster,
Mm.
which is that church growth mantra. It's American consumerism. This
Yeah.
is when I first learned what grace was. It was the first time I had felt totally rejected and
Mm.
abandoned and had to rely on God and God alone to
Yeah.
understand. It also reoriented my path. I never quit pastoring, but I've been by vocation ever since that moment. I
Mm.
started teaching and found in academia an outlet for my passions and interests that complemented what I was doing in the church. I've never really felt a tension between them, but
Yeah.
that redirection was deeply satisfying in the long run because there I
Mm.
found the expressions of what God had called me to be and do in the world. I had to process that what I thought, what I did with the people who hurt me like this.
Mm.
30 years later, I will still say that they did wrong. It took me 5 years to forgive them.
Mm.
30 years later, I will not claim to understand it, but I eventually got to the point where I could stop blaming it on bad people and start appreciating what bad culture does to people. They were as
Mm.
much as victims of this organizational culture, this
Yeah.
ministry culture as I was. And this is just the way things are done. And so if something's not working, boom, you move somebody out, you bring somebody up. It turns out this church had a long history of that and continued to do that after I was gone. And so there was a cultural problem that needed to be healed. I was too young and too naive and too inexperienced to be able to recognize that cultural problem.
Yeah.
And they were too enmeshed in it to be able to see it for themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of my passions these days, is to help people learn how to read a culture. I believe leaders need to have a heavy dose of anthropology. We need to become culture anthropologists. I make my
Yes.
students now read some culture anthropology. We
Yeah.
have to be able to read a culture, a
Mm.
community, an organization, a neighborhood,
Yeah,
a
I love that
human.
distinction about the woundedness coming from the culture that we're all steeped in, and including ourselves as we're wounded in it, versus the person. Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, thanks.
Hmm.
It was incredibly painful because, I didn't know what else to do with my life.
Yeah.
I was really good at this. I was called to this. And it took a while. And of course, in those days, I was living in a parsonage. So my family lost their home.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was working for the chair of the Personnel Relations Committee at the church, which had made this decision. She lost her job. My daughter lost her friends, the only home she ever knew.
Yeah.
Um, we were not given much in the way of severance or warning. And suddenly there we're homeless. We have to find a place. I have to find work. It was incredibly scary and painful. It
Mm.
need not have been.
Yeah.
But man, the grace of God in that was incredibly powerful. I would not be the person I am today if I had not experienced that. So I just look back and I'm grateful for God's goodness, even while I will continue to insist 31 years later, that was wrong. You meant it for evil, but
Mm.
God worked it out for good. I mean, that's a biblical theme, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. And there were so many ramifications to that wounding. We could do a whole podcast on what our children feel as we get wounded, if we're specifically a leader in the ministry. What if you would succinct that wound into like a phrase or a lie or an expectation, what would it be as you were going through that you were believing before you felt that grace come in and maybe understanding?
It was my job to make things happen. That was the
Mm.
lie. And I was really good at making things happen. Took me a
You had
long
the
time to
results of it. Yeah.
if that's what we think leadership is, then we got to make things happen. Then we're
Oh,
going to bear a burden of responsibility that actually belongs to the Holy Spirit.
oh, you could
This
talk
is
on that.
this is my passion now. Let's take that burden of responsibility off of leaders.
Yes. And quite frankly, right now, my husband and I are in a season of waiting, and we've been in ministry for 25 plus years, and it feels uncomfortable and wrong not to be doing things or making things happen. And in that uncomfortableness, the Lord is teaching us that he is the one who makes things grow. He is the one who makes things happen. I want you to wait on me. And I'm like, oh, I hope I learn to love to wait, which I think I am. But that concept of he's the one who does it, you don't, is very counterintuitive to many leaders. We think it's about the
Absolutely.
hustle. We think it's about
Yeah.
going out and getting it done. And we wax eloquently about how the Holy Spirit is, the power and stuff. But where does that like actually show up in the actions that we take? And so I resonate with that season of waiting, of being silent, of going against the mold of like I need to be out there serving and doing all these things, which
Mhm.
quite frankly, there's a part in a season for that. But right now he's like, I'm going to teach you what it means to sit at my feet
Yeah.
and
Part of
wait.
the part of the waiting is learning to notice, to see
Yes.
what is going on. So this is the mistake I made. I do bear some responsibility for this. Our church was growing. We were busting at the seams. The parking lot was full. I did what any good pastor would do. We need a second service so we can fit more people in here because more people was the goal.
Yeah.
And what I failed to take into account, because I was not mature, was what that meant emotionally to a church that had gone through a church split a few years before I
Mm.
arrived. The second service was not a logistical matter for them. It was splitting their congregation again, and that had been so painful. I
Mm.
missed the emotional cues.
Mm.
And that's why they responded the way they did. This guy wants to hurt us, therefore
Yes.
he has to go.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that goes, there is a, to wounding, we often talk about our physical wounds, okay? And we're much better at getting attention to those and going to the doctor for those. But the spiritual, the emotional, the mental wounds, the things that you're talking about right now, reading the culture in the room. This isn't about logistics. This is about, are people actually mentally and emotionally ready for something like that? Is a huge piece to woundedness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of what God's been teaching me over the years is I don't have to make everything happen. Pay attention, Tony. See what's here. Look below the surface.
Mm.
So one of the leadership models, change models that I have come to really appreciate is called appreciative inquiry. The
Mm.
dominant model of our culture, and I see a lot of churches using it too, is a leading change model by John Cotter at Harvard Press. It's very top down, very linear, and
Hmm.
everything. It's what John Maxwell, the leading leadership guru in the United States, always says: everything rises and falls on leadership. Oh, please no, no, and
Not in today's culture, we hope not, because it's not doing too
most of what
well.
most of what Maxwell says won't hurt us, but I think he's very, very wrong on that. Everything doesn't rise and fall. Leadership rises and falls on the Holy Spirit, and we have
Mm.
a role to play in that. And so David Cooperrider comes along and says, what if the best way to provoke change is by asking questions and listening carefully?
Mm.
And when I got trained in spiritual directions, suddenly it made sense. What do spiritual directions and directors do? They ask questions, listen carefully with the spirit.
Yes. The double listening, I've heard this phrase, the compassionate curiosity, and asking yourself that, but then being willing, you have to be able to ask yourself that first, because if you can't have compassionate curiosity to yourself, how can you do that to other people? But yes.
Yeah. And the very act of asking questions, and you ask about what works well. You ask positive questions. That's why he's appreciative. And that's his
Yes.
story. The very act of asking the questions about what works well, it's by itself that provokes change. It
Yeah.
feels a much more, at least resonant with my faith. Not an
Mm.
explicitly Christian model, but I have used that for going on 20 years now as a very different way of going about this process of leading. I don't need to make things happen. I do ask a lot of questions. I listen
Yes.
carefully. I pay attention to what's going on. I read the room, read the culture, and then we see what God is up to.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's so powerful to hear about your woundedness and not just acknowledging those wounds, but what the acknowledgement of it opens this door into what comes next, which is the healing. So when you look at your own healing, kind of the return back to your true self, and leading from this place of wholeness, because that's the goal. Healing is the goal. We don't want to stay in woundedness. Although we will, as we continue to live as humans, we'll have other woundings. But what did returning look like to you in that season, over that span? I mean, you gave us a little bit of a picture of how long it took to forgive or to maybe understand a little bit, but what were some of the pieces along the way? Get practical for me, and how you um, sought out that healing, what it looked like in the process.
Yeah, let me tell if there's enough time, maybe a second
Yes, yes.
did this better. The first time around, I didn't have to return to something because I wasn't fully formed yet into, I didn't know who I was to be. It helped me
Yeah.
find that. I did have a second one about 10 years later, and this was in higher ed. A very, in one sense, a similar story. One day I got called into a room, and I was the dean, the graduate school dean at a Christian university, and suddenly I wasn't anymore. Or did
Mm.
this happen? One
Yeah.
of the things that Christians need to learn how to do better is address things as they emerge and not just suddenly surprise people and beat them over the head with something. No one should ever be surprised in a
Yeah.
conversation like this. So, but I had positive performance reviews. Everything seemed to be going well. And suddenly I found out that there had been a campaign behind my back, and there were people who were unhappy with some of the things that I was doing, hadn't talked to me. They'd gone behind, they triangulated, and I found realized that I was in a culture that encouraged that.
Mm.
Again, a very
Big
common
culture.
pattern in any human culture, but Christians, we do this sometimes.
Yeah.
And I had read the culture wrong. This is the way that I was wired. I was Terrence Deal and Lee Bowman have this great book on reframing organizations,
Mhm.
talks about four perspectives we bring to it. And I'm a structural frame kind of guy. I see the connections and I work the process. This was a political frame organization where power is brought to bear and you don't work the process. You just do what you need to do. And after a while, I started calling it whack-a-mole. Uh, the old carnival trick where if somebody puts their head up too high, bam, and you learn not to lift your head up,
Yeah.
not to poke out too much. And I had survived in that culture for quite a while, but eventually was, like everybody else, a victim of a really, really dysfunctional culture that did not practice grace. So
Mm.
what do I do? Well, but this time I'm a little bit older. I have a little sense of who I am, and I have a little better sense of what grace is. So
Mm.
I'm like, oh my goodness, here I am, different context, having a similar experience as before. What do I do about it? This time I was not kicked out of the organization. I had tenure. I could stay. I was immediately offered jobs elsewhere, but I felt that God wanted me to stay in
Mm.
this community that had hurt me so badly
Mm.
and somehow try to practice and model grace. If not for their sake, at least for my own.
Yeah.
Is this grace I believe in so passionately? Is it possible in a situation like this? So the
Mm.
moment I'm fired, I'm looking at my boss on the other side of the table and I'm seeing he's trembling a little bit. And the grace was present in that moment. Man, I said, I've been where you're sitting far too often. I know how hard it is on that side of the table. Is there anything I can do to make this easier for you today? He
Mm.
about fell off his chair. I almost did too, because I don't know where that came from other than the spirit.
Wow. He's like, I'm trembling. You're the one who's supposed to be trembling here.
Yeah. And 3 years later, God did call me on to another ministry. I ended up at Evangelical Seminary, and that was a much more positive culture and a much more positive leadership role. But for those 3 years, I got to practice grace in a community where I didn't know who was talking behind my back and who wasn't. I didn't know who was supportive and who wasn't. I didn't know who hurt me and who didn't. And somebody else came in and took my office and took my job, and I got relegated kind of out to the margins. And it's like, what do I do every single time? What do I do? How do I? Well, I've been teaching this stuff. I've
Yeah.
been preaching this stuff. Why don't I practice this stuff?
Being a practitioner. I know I keep hearing that word. Let's be a practitioner of what we believe.
Yeah. I don't say did it perfectly, but I did my darndest.
Yeah. What did you do? I love how you mentioned how there was a similar experience. Because I've experienced that myself too. You are yourselves and you go into different contexts and you realize that your head does go up a little higher. It makes it a little easier for the whack-a-mole. And it's this, you do that in the same places. How do you not um, think this is about me? There's something wrong with me versus like this is a culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that you can avoid that question. You have to resolve that. There are people that for whom it doesn't work out because they've got some unresolved stuff that they just never dealt with, and they run into the same problem again and again.
Yeah.
You'll joke about somebody with 20 years experience versus somebody who's had 1 year experience 20 times. If you find yourself
Yeah. Yeah.
repeating the same pattern, but after a while, the ultimate answer was coming to terms with my odd duckness. Be willing
Mm.
to embrace it. I don't fit the standard mold.
Oh, Tony, you're speaking my language.
I became comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Every leadership position since then, I've adapted to fit who I am, my weirdness.
Yeah.
And if they can't take my weirdness, I'm probably not your guy.
Yeah.
I look at things differently. I do things differently. I am
Your
uncomfortable
prophetic
with this.
edge. Your
Yeah,
prophetic edge.
maybe that's it. Or I don't do the whole suit and tie thing very well. I'm not a, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't do the performing monkey tricks that leaders are
Mm.
supposed to do. The performance art that comes.
Yes, the performing. And that comes a lot with leadership. But I do love how you mentioned you have to spend time and reflect. I mean, is this me just repeating this over and over? Like, is there something for me to learn in this? Or is this, no, I am being authentic to who I am. And it's people are having a little bit of difficulty figuring
Yeah.
out who I am and how they fit. There two different things.
Or
Um,
some combination thereof.
Yes, yes, for sure. And you also acknowledged like on your end, like maybe not reading the room well. And I can be yeah, have had done that before too. Not reading the culture well. Boy, I missed that.
Well, let me tell you one quick one here. This time around, I hired a leadership coach. Hey, I've been through this twice now. So what's going on here? So he went and talked to a bunch of people, both with dumber contexts, people who loved me, people who hated me,
Yeah.
and brought back and said the interesting thing is they are all, even the people who hate you, are very complimentary of you. They they think you bring along. Well, that's good to know. Okay, that's cool. So what's the issue here?
Yeah.
Everybody agrees, even the people that love you, you scare the daylights out of them. Me, I'm
Mm.
not scary. Yeah, you are. I had to embrace the fact. And what it was is that
Mm.
I do have a gift of imagination. I can see what could be. I believe that's
Mm.
a leadership role to provoke the imagination. But
Yeah.
once the moment I saw it, I'm running 90 miles an hour toward it,
Mm. Yes.
out, bringing them along and
Yes.
where I was going and why I was going. And even the ones who trusted me, liked me, or even loved me, got scared sometimes.
Yeah.
I learned from that. And when I became a seminary president, I slowed the process down and shared the imagining with the whole team. So we did it together and it
Yeah,
wasn't,
bringing it along together. Mm.
that was so very helpful to learn. So some of it was my stuff.
Yeah.
And some of it was just, I'm going to be an imaginative leader wherever I'm at. So I'm going
Yeah.
to think, not just think outside the box. I'm going to
Propel you to be thinking more. Yeah. And
play.
and a lot of that has to do with being honest and this radical self-awareness, which I like to continue to talk about as I coach, because if you are not willing to be radically self-aware, I mean, we have blind spots. We need to continue to investigate ourselves and then just come forward and say, hey, just so you know, I'm very imaginative. I can come across as this, that, and the other thing. I want you to know I'm not trying to do that or be scary. And I think sometimes even just acknowledging those aspects of yourself, you are having compassion on yourself to say, this is who I am. And
Yeah.
this is also how people might perceive me. So let's dialogue about that.
Yeah. And then maybe turn it into something. This is what we try to do at Hosanna now. I
Yeah.
don't feel that I have to be the burden. I have wear the burden anymore of being the imaginative one in the room. What I do is try to provoke the imagination of
Mm,
others.
yes.
So one of our rules, we have very few rules, but one of our rules among our staff is we will never make a decision between only two options.
Mm,
Because that's the typical thing. It's A or B. No, I
yeah.
refuse to decide between A or B. Put at least an option C on the table, but if you can, put D, E, F, and G on the table as well. Do as
Yeah.
many as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Maybe in the end, we'll pick one of the first two, but the process of thinking
Mm,
through those, that imaginative process,
yeah.
provokes all sorts of creativity and options that
Yeah.
we never would have taken the time to think otherwise. And
And
they're
allows
the ones being imaginative.
Right. And allows them to participate in the process. So we talked about before about a culture of like not being emotionally ready. But when you bring people into that process, it allows their emotions to catch up with, oh, I thought I wanted this, but actually, as we're dialoguing about all this, I see how that wouldn't work. And that doesn't happen if you don't have that diversity in options or dialogue.
Yes.
Yes. Oh,
I'll offer another phrase that we use with our team all the time. This one somebody gave to me 40 years ago. I wish I could footnote it, but the greatest hindrance to the best is the good.
mm,
We tend to think that the greatest hindrance to the best is the bad. We got choice between good and bad. No, those are easy decisions.
yeah.
I mean, we still sometimes choose the bad, but at least we know we are. No, we will. The problem is that when we're offered a choice between good and best, we will very often settle for what is good. It's good
Mm,
enough instead of going for what is best. So provoking the imagination reintroduces us to the best
yeah.
option. Gee, wow, that really brings things together. And
Mm,
I never would have gone there if I hadn't been forced to think through that process. That
yeah.
one's best. C
Yeah.
would work, but G's better. Let's do it.
Wow. And the provoking, seeing yourself as now the provoker versus wearing the burden of having to bring it forth. That's really good. What permission are you giving yourself now in leadership that you might not have given yourself early on?
To not worry.
Mm,
I don't do that one fully either, but the degree to which I was addicted to responsibility was a degree to which I was also addicted to anxiety.
mm.
And the problem is, I made up this statistic, so I won't cite this one, but we as leaders control only 15 to 20% of the factors that determine our success, whatever that means.
Mm,
80% of it is beyond our control anyway. So why the heck would we carry that responsibility?
mm.
I'm still unlearning that addiction, but
Yeah. And
that's
who defines what success is anyways? We think we know how to define success, but it can be defined in so many different ways. Oh,
well, no, or no consumer culture. Like I said, the whole
yes.
North American church is addicted to bigger, better, faster. I think the
Yeah.
kingdom of God is smaller, simpler, slower. I love alliteration.
Yes.
So if success is smaller, simpler, slower, then maybe there's a lot more churches, a lot more leaders successful, more successful than they think they are.
Yes. Amen to that. I've been doing a lot of research into like micro churches and like the smaller model.
I did
And
that for 5 years too. Yeah.
yeah, um, fascinating concept just to even be thinking about doing things smaller. There's very few large things that Jesus did. It was often, yeah, illustrations and images in small sense. You think about the mustard seed and yeah,
And in his third year of ministry, most of his followers left him.
yeah,
So by our North American definitions, he was a leadership failure.
yes.
Hmm.
Defining it again comes back to how do we define what success is? And you mentioned about being addicted to responsibilities. I think a lot of times the only way to detox from that is to get rid of them. Oh, I'm really not that important. I Oh, what do I need to do today? I just need to listen to the Spirit of God to what He's asking me instead of my to-do list. Well, Tony, this has been such a wonderful conversation. But before we close, I want to give you the last word. Is there anything on your heart that you could give to leaders who are listening today, or even to those who would not consider themselves an actual leader?
Much of what I would suggest is stuff I've already said somewhere in passing here. I think the word leader may not be terribly helpful to us sometimes. Be who God has called you to be. If you do that, then you will naturally do what it is that God has called you to do. Some of those activities will be defined by others as leadership. Some will be defined as followership. Some will be ambiguous. This is a matter of being. This is a matter of being fully formed. And we haven't paid as much attention to the formation of ourselves and embracing of ourselves. And by the way, I'll throw in this one with it because you mentioned it earlier. God does not shame us into formation, into wholeness. That is not his tactic. That's the tactic of the church, but it's not God's.
Yes.
It's always grace all the way through. So allow that grace to more fully form you. Be who you're supposed to be. Everything else will fall in place.
Amen. And for anyone who maybe just wants to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing or your books, or do you have a place that they could check you out or email you or anything?
Yeah, we could do email. I haven't done very much in the way of self-promotion. So there's no website or anything like that. But A. Blair at Kairos, which is the New Testament word, KAIROS.edu, would come to an inbox that I'm in quite frequently, and I'd be glad to chat further.
Okay, great, great. And in the show notes, I can put like links to your books and maybe articles or something like that you've written if people are interested in different ways of leading. But thank you. Oh, good. Were you going to say something else?
No, I could make mention of a couple of those that won't be particularly helpful, but
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. We'd love to.
Joanne Kunz and I have developed a leadership model that is based upon the Old Testament model, prophet, priest, and king. And the premise is we're all leaders, we're all followers. There are prophets, there are priests, there are kings throughout any organization. And identifying which of those roles we might associate with. Kings tend to order things in the center. Prophets tend to disorder things in the margins. Priests tend to reorder things in between them. But it's all leadership. And maybe that could give us some permission giving a little bit. And if you are in church leadership, I co-authored a book with a friend of mine some years ago called Leading Missional Change that had a surprising conclusion about the role of trust in leadership. So you might check that out.
Oh, yes. Mutual accountability and all that good stuff.
Well, it was about the conclusion was that the leaders who were best at leading change were not necessarily the most trusted. They had to give up some of their trustworthiness in order to see. And it was a fascinating study.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I can attest to the prophet, priest, and king article. That's really good. That aspect is really good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your leadership journey, your vulnerability. I know that my listeners will just be really encouraged to know that that they are normal. Someone who has been in various leadership roles and still experiencing wounding and then healing and coming out from that. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you, Amanda, for modeling this yourself.
Yes.
You are an extraordinary leader, and I'm glad you're sharing your wisdom and that of your colleagues with others.
Thank you. Well, until next time, check us out at The Leadership Wound. And if you are interested in leading and living more authentically, I'd love to start a conversation with you. I have a free 30-minute free call that you can get to on my website, authenticleadershipcollective.com. Until next time, lead like you.